Looking for something we can rely on. There's got to be something better out there. Love and compassion. That day is coming. All else are castles built in the air. And I wonder when we are ever gonna change. Living under the fear till nothing else remains. All the children say we don't need another hero. We don't need to know the way home. All we want is life beyond the Thunderdome.
Tina Turner's hit, We Don't Need Another Hero, Thunderdome, was the theme to the 1985 film Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Given her personal history, one might imagine this song having meaning well beyond the movie's themes. After all, heroes are typically portrayed as men deserving our admiration. Their flaws are often minimized or outright ignored because of their achievements. Be it personally or professionally, most of us want to succeed in our own right, not have some hero swoop in and save the day. That doesn't mean we don't seek help or advice. We often need one or both, and we seek it from those we trust the most. But what is trust? How do we become trustworthy? For answers, I talked with Mark Slatin, who created the Trusted Guide Roadmap Masterclass. This week on Next in Q, Mark and I discuss trust and the 4 elements in the Trust Quotient, transitioning from hero to trusted guide, 3 forms of customer loyalty, measuring the ROI and value of CX, and practical tips for enhancing your own trustworthiness. Let's get to it.
Welcome to Next in Q, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Q is brought to you by Happy 2 Vision. Eliminate blind spots and see right through every conversation with Happy 2 Vision. Learn more at happitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Mark Slatin, thanks so much for being Next in Q. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a long list of accomplishments, but I think we can start with the fact that you are the CX advisor and consultant of Empowered CX, your own consultancy, and you teach, not just consult. Can you tell us just a little bit about your teaching background? Because I find that fascinating.
Sure. I taught for on and off for about 6 or 7 years at Loyola University in the Baltimore area. And I taught mostly, originally it was a sales leadership course. And then later on, when my career changed to customer experience, I built out and developed a course called Customer Experience Management. Now I teach in a master, so that was an MBA program. Now I teach in a Master's of Science degree program, a degreed program in Customer Experience Management at Michigan State University. And I'm honored to be on the faculty there with 14 other professors, and we are excited to be part of the one of its kind program. Unfortunately, we hope there's more that pop up, but right now we're the only one that offers a degreed program in CXM, at least in North America.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people that are aware of all kinds of accreditations and certificates that you can achieve within the CX space, but this is an actual degree program. And I too hope lots more pop up, but it is very cool that you are working with the one and only in the country today. So I want to talk with you specifically about trust. And I don't think I could have found someone more aligned with this particular topic. And that is because you currently run a series of master classes called the Trusted Guide Roadmap. So let's just start with the bare basics. What the heck is trust? Like, let's define that.
That is such a great question. And it's part of the reason why it's so hard. There's so many definitions out there of trust that it's really hard to gain mastery over something that is hard to define to begin with. So I connected, I was lucky enough to connect with and become part of Trusted Advisor Associates, who the CEO and founder, Charles H. Green, was a co-author of the book, The Trusted Advisor, and co-author of the 20th anniversary edition that came out last year of The Trusted Advisor. And he created training and different programs around Trusted Advisor. And so I got certified and trained in that before I even got into the CX world. In that model, there's something called the trust equation, and the purpose of it is to help define what trust actually is. According to the model, the equation works sort of like a mathematical equation. On the left, you have trust. Really, to be more accurate, it's trustworthiness. It might as well be called the trustworthiness equation, because you've got the trustor, the trustee, and someone doing the trusting, the person who wants to be trusted, and you've got this noun trust, which is the thing that happens between them. And so that trustworthiness, if you can imagine like a quotient, on the top you've got the numerator. There are three things on the numerator: credibility, reliability, and intimacy, all over something called S, which is self-orientation. And it's in the denominator by itself, because it's the inverse of trustworthiness, right? It's almost directly proportional. The more people feel like you're self-focused versus other focused, the less trustworthy you'll be. So that's what the S is. And then the credibility, it has to do with, yes, you think about, do I have the data right? Is my data credible? But more than that, with people who are beyond the technical expertise, it's, do I trust you in the sense of, do you look me straight in the eye when you're talking to me? Do you speak with confidence, right? So I use the example of someone giving you directions, and you're lost, and they're saying, well, I think you ought to make a left turn. I think it's a third or fourth light, I'd say, after the Burger King. Maybe that was a McDonald's. So, you're probably going to pull out your map or your GPS before you follow those directions. So that's what credibility has to do with. It really has to do with the words that you use. And yes, it's connected to your certifications and degrees or your medical lab jacket, but it really has to do with those other things I talked about. And then reliability is whether or not you follow through on your promises, right? So that's kind of straightforward. It's whether you're predictable, whether you're dependable. And that's the one that really requires the passage of time to really know the answer to. Are you trustworthy in that sense? And then the other one on there, the I, which is intimacy, is about psychological safety, right? So do I trust you? Are you trustworthy in the sense of, you've created sort of a safe haven for us to have difficult conversations? I feel like you're a vault. I can trust you with sharing confidential information. And also, like, you'll know how to empathize with me if I share something with you that's personal in nature or means something specific to me. You'll know whether to laugh or whether to cry with me or whether just to listen. So that has to do with intimacy. And And so those are the four variables, as I mentioned, all over the S. So there's a joke in the field, like get off your S, right? Which is self-orientation, because that is a huge factor. As it turns out, a bit of a spoiler. So the reason the authors put the S in the bottom is they thought it was going to be the most powerful of the four. And it turns out that after 100,000 surveys or assessments that were completed, the correlation is higher to intimacy. And both self-orientation and intimacy have to do more with the emotional side of the brain, and the credibility and reliability have to do more with the rational or logical side of the brain. All of them are important, but if you ask, what is trust or trustworthiness in this case, yeah, you probably want to think about it in terms of those four variables.
So I love that you brought up that two of these are very different than two of the others, right? It seems like two of them are pretty easy to quantify in traditional kind of KPIs, if you will, and a couple of others are less easy to quantify. But as businesses, when we think about CX and we put in processes in place and we're looking for new tools, often we rely on KPIs to identify the effectiveness of what we're doing to help us on our roadmap. Are we often making a big mistake and forgetting about those two particular variables that are more emotional? And how do we go about rectifying that if that's the case?
Well, that's also a great question. And I think, yes, we are missing the boat largely. I just had a conversation with the head of patient experience at Tufts University Medical Center in Boston, the Boston area. And there's a crisis, according to many in healthcare, of a lack of compassion. Compassion speaks directly to the two that we talked about, intimacy and self-orientation. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. There's a book called Compassionomics, in which the author is the medical director at Cooper Union Hospital in Camden, New Jersey. And he's done all this research to talk about why it's the case and the impact of it to businesses. So that is, we're talking about the high stakes of human experience when you're about to get a bad diagnosis for something. In the case of Tufts, it's the breast cancer and radiology and oncology. But in the book, they talk about terminal patients. The studies were done with terminal patients, so whether it's cancer or something else, and there is a huge lack of care, and part of it is because of sort of the production mentality that's filtered into the medical world about getting 15-minute visits with patients, and so you can get as many patients in a day, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on a doctor. They don't feel like they have the time, and quite frankly, they have a bit of suffering from burnout themselves in the medical industry. It's very true. Part of it started with COVID. They're shorthanded, so they're asked to do more. All these things factor together. But yes, there's a direct impact. It is harder to measure. It's not impossible to measure. You need to tap into questions around. A good survey design would ask questions around this, and measure. And also you look at the feedback you get verbally or through verbatims, or if you're talking to a patient group, a patient/provider panel. There's ways to collect this data and get information about, how well are we doing in these areas. And I'm giving you an example of healthcare, but the same applies to whatever business you're in. Are you understanding how your brand is or isn't building trust with customers? And that is a really good question. I think a lot of times the data that we get back, it just overlaps, or it just kind of misses that question. And at the core of loyalty right? The bedrock of loyalty for customer loyalty is going to be trust. Do I trust you first?
So I've been having an ongoing conversation online, uh, a lot about CX, and this just popped into my head, and I wonder, do those two items carry as much weight if I feel like none of the brands that provide the product or service that I'm looking for, none of them I can trust? At that point, is it, I mean, obviously, if I could trust one, that would be a differentiator, but am I potentially, can I bank on some customer retention, not loyalty, but retention, because it's just, there's too much friction in switching? And are we seeing more of that? And is that why maybe we see like CX indexes falling because customers don't trust a lot of brands these days?
Yeah, so you're talking sort of in general terms about industries, and so it's kind of hard for me to answer sort of the general question. I mean, to be. I remember 10 years ago, we had, the lowest scores of Net Promoter Score. Those people listening probably know what NPS is. We're talking about the industry leader still may being in the negative numbers, right? That's how bad, utilities were considered, specifically internet providers. And so one was bragging, we're the top ranked in our industry, and you're still a negative NPS. So more customers wouldn't recommend you than would. So there's nothing to really be proud about. So we'll dig into the nuts and bolts of it, but what it means for me, if I want to be an optimist, there's an opportunity for me to go in there and take some market share just by being decent at the experience. In the course I teach, we talk a lot about loyalty and what is loyalty, and one of the models that I really like has to do with three types of loyalty in it. They talk about habitual loyalty, functional loyalty, habitual loyalty, and then true loyalty, which they describe sort of as emotional loyalty. And functional loyalty means basically you can do what I need you to do. And I may be buying from you because of convenience. For example, I go to my gas station because it's the closest to my house, and the difference are pennies per gallon. So I don't even look at the price. And so you're getting my business, and it appears like it's loyalty, but it's really more about convenience or function. The next one is about loyalty that's habitual, which means I've kind of gotten into the groove of going to your grocery store or just renewing my insurance with you because it's the easiest thing to do. But if someone came along with a better offer, or I heard from a neighbor that ABC Insurance is great, or you really got me upset for some reason, I would switch in a minute, right? But it appears like I'm loyal to you. The third kind is emotional loyalty in this particular model. And emotional loyalty means that I have an emotional connection to the brand because they've done a good job by me. They've treated me well. I feel loyal in the sense that you could come along with a competitive offer. I'm not even going to pay attention to it. I am loyal. I'm not giving it the time of day. I would defend the brand. That's how much I like it, much less refer it to friends and neighbor. I would defend and forgive the brand. So there's different levels of loyalty, and I'll share again that it's directly correlated. It can't happen without trust. And so trust needs to be high to get to that emotional level of loyalty. Otherwise, it appears like they're loyal customers, and retention is important. What business doesn't like retention? Just knowing that those customers, you may be overstating the level of health of your customer base.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
It's
makes sense.
really
Yeah.
interesting, and it hits home with me because I can think of very specific examples of all of those sorts of loyalty. Sometimes it's just out of convenience.
Right.
And it is a matter of function. Sometimes it's just this habit. It's easy. And it's, of quite honestly, more effort, like I was talking about, more effort to make a change. And then there are 100% brands that I would defend. Longtime listeners can probably name a few. Recently, you and I were both featured in a video series done by Luke Jameson and Michael Madsen, and one of the recent ones, we were all given superhero names, but I'd like to talk to you about the kinds of problems you can encounter being a hero versus being a guide.
Yeah. So you're now speaking my language because when I was trying to figure out what I'd like to do in my business, I do consulting, I do coaching, but I thought there's more. There's more that I can offer. And I feel like there's some sort of training in there for CX leaders, but I don't know what it was. And then I heard about this book by a guy named Donald Miller, who's in the marketing world, who wrote a book called Building a Story Brand. And largely it's based on the hero's journey. And that is that in every story, just about nearly every story, there's a hero, there's a guide, there's a victim, and a villain. And the hero is the person who has some goal that they're trying to attain, something they're trying to win, but there's some barrier or obstacle in their way. The guide is that person with some experience through the school of hard knocks, who has the wisdom from going through the pain and suffering, and now they've got the wisdom. And then the victim is someone who doesn't really steal the show in the story, but they're important. And the truth is that there may be, and the villain is obviously the person creating a lot of the conflict in the story to make it noteworthy and to make it interesting, right? You need to have a villain. It's interesting. The hero is, if you think about the movie The King's Speech, right? King George VI, I guess it was struggling with a speech impediment during World War II. London was about to get bombed by Nazi Germany, and he had to come out and give the national address over like a public address radio type system. And if you saw the movie, you know this guy Lionel Logue, who was really a dramaticist who turned speech therapist, helped him overcome his impediment, at least to get through these speeches. And he gave encouragement and support and rallied the troops literally and rallied the people to help England do its part in defeating Nazi Germany. So there are many movies like that. You can think about Karate Kid. You can think about Rocky. You could think about Willy Wonka. There's these, and one of my favorite is The Wizard of Oz, right? So you've got these, but nobody in the CX world, when we talk about change management, which really what CX is all about, we need to change from the current state to some better future state for our customers. Nobody's interested in another hero. And that they don't want another hero. As Tina Turner once said, we don't need another hero. We might be open, though. They might be open to a guide who can help them bridge the gap from where they are today to help them achieve their goals. And so that's a huge trap. I know I fell into it more than one time as a CX leader in jumping to this hero role. Nobody wants that. It's you get, and this is directly connected to trust, and that the denominator I was talking about, self-orientation. It's the opposite of that. It's focusing on them and their issues and their goals and helping them, communicating with them on how you're going to help them get to their goals. So that, to me, that was the goal that helped me develop this Trusted Guide Roadmap Masterclass.
Yeah, I love it. I recently had a conversation with Matt with Cognitive Copy, who runs the BPO Bullhorn newsletter. And we talked a little bit about this. And his comment was, you are not the hero of the story, right? Your customer is the hero. You're there to help them. And I think all too often we want to be the hero. We want to step in and save someone, when really, if we want to be trusted, we should focus on being that guide to help them be the hero, whoever it is that them is that we're interacting with. So I absolutely love that. Illustrated it beautifully. I also, speaking of people in this video series, I just recently had a conversation with Jeff Sheehan, and we were talking about ROI. And CX and ROI are huge things. But are there different ways to measure ROI? I think most people think, right, that there's one way to measure it, but are there different ways?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's been a drumbeat that's been going on now, I don't know, about 4 or 5 years at least, about CX leaders fail because they don't demonstrate the ROI of CX. And I think I'd like to reframe that sentiment from my personal experience and call it, they don't demonstrate the value. And so value is a bigger word than ROI. Really, when you get down to the nuts and bolts of ROI, what you're talking about is it sounds very concrete, but actually it's pretty darn fuzzy. Because first of all, before I even start to talk about a couple of the different models out there, one thing I'm pretty sure of is that whatever justification I share with senior management, the C-suite, let's say, and I say, we're going to have this kind of ROI on this initiative, who is going back 3 years from now to check to see what the ROI was? How often does that happen? So that's just one aspect of the problem with using the ROI of CX. Two is, if I'm in the C-suite and I've got CX, the CX leader, the marketing leader, the IT leader, the product leader coming to me one after the other for our annual or our monthly executive team meeting, and they're all pitching what they need support on and budget dollars for. One has to do with reducing costs. One has to do with increasing revenue. One has to do with reducing risk. Another one might have to do with increasing share of wallet. So really what you end up with is a completely apples and oranges comparison of a decision that you have to make. And then you go right back to emotion, which, Charlie Green, who wrote the Trusted Advisory, he calls it a sandwich. The sandwich is, I need some data as a top slice of bread to start the conversation with, to help me with my rational mind. And then in the middle, the meat is really around the emotion. And then there's another piece of rationale that helps me justify it that I'm going to come up with in my mind. And that's the sandwich. But really, at the end of the day, as Gerald Zaltman from Harvard said, 95% of decisions, buying decisions, he wrote, but this really is a buying decision, have to do with emotion. And only 5% are based on pure logic. So value, when we talk about value, it's bigger than that. And it includes things like, do you have a concrete roadmap as a CX leader of how you're going to help show us how we're going to get from point A to point B in, let's say, 3 years? What are the elements of that roadmap? Does it make common sense to me? And do I emotionally connect to that roadmap? And part of that is, did you have consensus in building it? Do you have the support of my middle managers who are really going to make that happen, by the way, and senior managers? And two, is it aligned with our stated corporate goals? Are you going against the river somehow, the flow of the river? If you're a CX leader or any leader trying to make change, one of the smartest things you can do is dovetail into what the executives have already said is a 1 year or 2 year goal for them. Tap right into that. And by the way, going back to emotion, hit into what they've said are the cultural values of the organization. That's the language you need to speak in. And so I think ROI, yes, it's a yes and sport. I'll be the first to say that. And you go back to improv, yes, both can be true. Yes, you need to demonstrate, for the purposes of that sandwich, but realize that it's the emotional piece that is going to be what those decisions are hinged on, and you've got to connect with them emotionally. But value, and I gave the example of the roadmap. There are many other ways that you're going to provide value, but recognize that it's not just in these mathematical models. And for the reasons I shared at the top, is that oftentimes it ends up being non-verifiable, or it's verifiable but nobody does. And two, it ends up being really an apples and oranges comparison.
Well, if you can make them the hero,
Yeah.
that's the return. That's the return they're looking for. So certainly, if you're digging into the things that they've been talking about that they want to accomplish, you're doing that, you'll be looked upon as a trusted advisor, and lots of success there. I have a little bit of a question that I'm guessing you've probably never been asked before, but if you were going to have someone write a song about being a trusted advisor, would it be Elton John or Billy Joel, and why?
Oh, wow. Well, you talk about two of my favorite musicians, and I have been fortunate enough to see them both perform at the same time one time with my daughter at RFK Stadium in Washington, which was an amazing concert. Which one would I have write a song about being a trusted advisor? Either one would be a suitable choice. I probably would lean more toward Billy Joel for this reason. Number one, the guy has done 150 concerts at Madison Square Garden every month, for 10 years. So there's some trust that he's built with his audience over that time.
Reliable,
they're both about
right?
the same. He's got
Reliable.
that R. He's got that reliability built in. It's a really hard question, but that would probably be. I mean, So I'll share one other story with you, and I don't think he does this anymore. But Billy Joel did this for a while. Talk about other focus, right? This would be my reason why. So you may or may not know this if you're a Billy Joel fan, but oftentimes at Billy Joel concerts, the front row would be seated at the first two rows would be scalp tickets. And he said, it's ridiculous. My shows aren't worth $50,000 a seat. He's joking, but people paid a ridiculous amount of money for the front row seats. And so he's like, you know what? We're going to buy those seats, and we're going to have our roadies go to the back two rows of the stadium and hand out those tickets and move those people up to the front two rows. Because those people probably work really hard for their money, for what they earn, and they deserve, and they're here because they really want to be here. The people at the as he says, the people who just scalp the tickets, they're at the front, sitting in the front two rows. Go ahead and entertain me, piano man. So that's probably why I would pick Billy Joel. Tough to pick, but that's the reason why I would choose.
I love that. And I can't tell you, I have been to concerts where I've seen people spend the bulk of the time on their phone, not like holding it up and recording it, but literally just distracted by their phone. And I just think, why did you pay to be here, knowing that there are absolutely people with like the worst tickets in the house that are in the nosebleeds, and they are just sitting on the edge of their seat the entire time. And so I love that. That is a fantastic story to add to this. I have one last odd question, but can you tell the people in the audience who don't know, what the heck is a terrapin?
You did your research. You're right. I've never been asked either of those questions before. So a terrapin is more broadly known as a large turtle but also happens to be the mascot of the college I went to, Maryland Terrapins, and who are nicknamed the Terps. And we are battling to restore our football and basketball teams in particular to where they used to be.
Well, I was hopeful that while Danny Manning was there, at least the basketball team would do its thing. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So good luck where you are today. As long as you don't run into my Jayhawks, then I'll just have to root against you once again. Lots and lots of talk about trust, but I have really one last question as it relates to this. You mentioned earlier in the conversation with this equation that really that T should be trustworthiness. If I'm a leader in any organization and I want to be seen as more trustworthy, what are some concrete things that I could do to change my image or enhance my image as it relates to trustworthiness?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Rob. And so I go back to the model, and I would look at first what I would do is you can go to Trusted Advisor Associates. And you know what, for your podcast, I'll send you, Rob, the link to the assessment. It's a free assessment, and see how you score on each of the 4 variables. And that might be a place to start, because the designers of the assessment suggest that you start with your lowest score. That tends to be the greatest positive change and outcomes for people who take the assessment. So I will send you that. But 2 is, so if for example, if it's self-orientation. So one of the things about self-orientation is that we tend to be really focused on ourselves. Now, that goes beyond, that's not typically like bragging about yourself. It could be those kind of, you're telling my story and I'm talking too much, but oftentimes it has to do with the preoccupation of self. So I'm worried about how I look. I'm worried about what I'm going to say next. I'm worried about maybe what just happened before the meeting, right? So I can't be fully present for the other person. And that comes off as not trustworthiness. I mean, the typical example is, I've got my phone out while I'm talking to you and you're sharing with me something very personal. Yeah, that's a low trust level. How likely am I going to be to want to share something kind of important with you? Right. So that's an example of self-orientation. I'll give you one more for, let's say, reliability. Since you asked for, I'll just share another one on reliability. Let's say that's your issue, and it could be. An example of how to be more reliable is to offer to take on some responsibility, maybe even a small piece of responsibility in the conversation, and do a follow-up. So a good example would be, hey, when we get together next time, how about if I set up the agenda for the meeting? I'll send you a draft agenda. And if it's good, and then you just follow through on that. You're taking the initiative. You're doing what you said you did. Yes, it's things like a follow-up email and a thank you. This is not rocket science. Improving your trustworthiness is not rocket science, but it's often just hard to do. And it starts with self-awareness. And so I just gave you a couple of examples. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, they're absolutely great. For everyone listening, we'll have that link in the show notes as well. So if you want to, number one, figure out kind of where you stand on the trustworthiness quotient, you can take the assessment. And then if you're like, hey, I need help, you can talk to Mark about getting some help. And we'll have links to Empower CX on the show notes and his LinkedIn so that you can message him. Mark, thank you so much for joining Next in Queue. It's great talking to you.
Hey, it's been a delight and a pleasure and so much fun to talk with you as well, Rob.
Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy To and is produced by me, Rob Dwyer. If you enjoy this podcast, Please, by all means, subscribe and or rate this podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. But more importantly, please tell just one person about this podcast. Word of mouth is the best way for people to discover new content. As always, thanks for listening.